In the 15th edition of the Computer Chess Championships, the new Stockfish, that's NNUE for those who don't speak, updated officially neural net, had 114 wins, 77 draws, and 1 single loss. You're about to see that loss in this video. And as we dive into it, we have to, of course, mention the fact that this new Stockfish is all the rage, all the discussion in the machine learning chess world environment. Is it the future of the SF open source community? Will all their focus go there? Will there ever be updates past SF11? I'm going to tell you all the rumors I'm hearing and what I think is actually going to happen at the end of the video, so stick around for that. For now, it's time to see how Stoofvlees, all I know is Stoofvlees rendered Stockfish, toothless, pun intended, in this particular French opening, which is not the only reason I chose it. Don't worry. Obviously, I do love when white gets the dub here against the inferior French defense. But jokes aside, we're in a main line that has been played many times by strong grandmasters on both sides. Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop E3, and this is exactly what we expect to see in mainline classical French theory. C takes D4, and then Knight takes D4. We reach our first kind of critical decision point to understand the goals of how each side is going to play. Stockfish played the move Queen to B6, which is the sharpest, most pressing variation. If you look up the opening, you'll note that Bishop to C5 has traditionally been the most popular move. Of course, is totally fine. But Queen to B6 points out the potential dysfunction in White's situation. It hits B2 with no easy way to defend it. You can't move this knight to anywhere to block the queen's gaze without the bishop falling. Moving the queen hangs the knight. So you see there's some issues here, which is why Queen B6 has gained popularity. And it pushes White to choose the only real way forward, which is to call Black's bluff. Are you going to take the pawn or not? And Black has shown that he is ready to do so in most mainline theory. After Rook to B1, Queen A3, we pause again just to point out that your eye will be drawn, if you haven't seen these lines before, to moves like Knight C to B5. It's a move that forks the queen, hits C7, guards the A5 square, so there's no way for the queen to come back and guard both. But the problem with Knight to B5 is that after Queen A2, your Rook is having been hit. You have to move it. And then Knight to C7 is a check, but not a fork, so just a check. Now, you can play this line, and White and Black have both received victories in this very, very sharp and tactical middle game, but it's not necessarily considered White's most solid approach for an advantage. Apparently, Stoofvlees was aware of this theory and played the move Bishop to B5. After Knight takes D4, Bishop D4, we get A6, and then Bishop takes D7, Bishop takes D7, reaches our first kind of instructive moment, whether you play the French or not. I'm going to describe to you why Rook to B3 is the main line here, and not the move Rook to B7. The key point is that Rook to B7 right away runs into Bishop to B4. Now, the Queen and Bishop are obviously developed well, putting pressure on the Queen side, but the main thing is that they've actually cut off the Rook from retreating here to the B3 square. What ends up happening is after the move castles, Bishop to C8 to save your Bishop, and then Black castles, there's no real way for White to untie that. The position is still roughly unclear, but Bishop D7 and Rook C8 are coming. Black doesn't have any other problems. Remember, White was just winning back the pawn, nothing more. And the fact that the Queen and Bishop have been able to maintain their aggressive post over here is the annoying thing. You really wish you had taken care of that earlier. That leads us to Rook to B3, which is the most popular move played by all grandmasters and Stoofvlees in our video. You gain a tempo on the Queen, force her backwards, and only then regain your pawn. All theory. Now, Rook to C8 is what was played by Stockfish. I think it's the best move. We should note that Queen H4 check was played by August Stein versus Fabiano Caruana several years ago. Even though Fabi didn't go on to get a win, the multiple tempos that he gained on the Queen and then this move Queen to D4 led to an advantage for White, even with the draw. The second move, instead of Rook to C8, is to voluntarily put your Queen on D8 right away. This is worth mentioning for bigger reasons. One, Hikaru Nakamura was playing the black pieces here against Sergei Karyakin. Shout out to our boy Hikaru. But also because this was the only game amongst strong grandmasters where White employed the idea we're going to see from this groundbreaking approach by Stoofvlees. F5 was played here. It didn't lead to the same success. The main reason is that Hikaru recognized that taking would not be ideal for what the French structure normally wants, right? F5 is designed to kind of undermine the solid house that Black builds his empire on, right? This very, very nice French pawn chain. And the reason that it doesn't actually disrupt that is because Black can play Queen to C8 with tempo, and then the move Queen to C4. This move actually stopped White from getting castled, leads to some problems, and ultimately the position was very equal. So in the game, that's not what happens. Rook to C8 is played, castles happens, and now on Queen to D8, we're in a main line that looks very similar to what we just saw between Karyakin and Nakamura, But what's the big difference? There is no queen to c8 coming to c4 to stop white from castling. And now after the move f5, we see the idea employed by Karyakin with a little bit more heat behind it. The rook is already on the f-file, which is going to lead to critical tactics we're going to show. And we know that in this position, if this is the house you build all your plans on in the French, you better have good, concrete, material, and tactical reason to take and break it. It's exactly the kind of move you would want to see an engine challenge another engine in, because we know that even with the neural nets, if they don't see an answer for why something is bad, they're going to take the material they're offered. In this position after f5, we're going to get to all the theory that was, but before we do, I want to say the other moves tried by strong grandmasters, for those who do play the French or this position for either side, you want to look into it. Rook f3 was actually played in this position by Alexander Grishuk against Shirov in 2019, so not too long ago. Recommend you might want to check it out. The move queen e3 was also played by Shirov on the other side of the color against Esteban Forsen in Linares in 2018. So those are the two most recent games by top grandmasters. But as we said, f5 has not been a move other than that Karyakin try that has had any real success. But in this position, Stoofvlees plays it, and Stockfish calls his bluff, says, I'm going to take the pawn. I think that it's worth it. I can then bring my bishop here. I don't need my pawn chain to stay super solid in a French like I normally do. Plus, there's other problems here. I can't really develop my bishop to the squares I want, like bishop to b4. Bishop a3 is useless. Bishop e7 might gain some tempos and some attacking chances because, like I said, this rook is here. So it's not just that f5 was played and let's say Stockfish made a bad move that Nakamura didn't do by taking the pawn. It's that black is already having trouble not taking the pawn. That is maybe most illustrated in a light I analyzed here with the move bishop c5. What if you don't take the pawn and deny it? In this position, we see a brilliant move. The move knight a4 was planned by Stoofvlees. Now, at first sight, it hangs the knight, but let's take a look. Bishop takes a4 is met by f takes e6, f takes e6, and then sometimes all it takes is just simple transition and a grabbing of an open file to point out to black that there's no real way to stop checkmate. That's exactly the line that, again, I analyzed it myself along with the help of my Chess.com team. We don't actually know what Stoofvlees was going to play, but that looks to be a clearly strong option. Note that if knight a4 is met by bishop takes d4, white can take. We end up transitioning into something closer to looking equality in a rook ending, but actually the position is already borderline lost here for black. I'll play out the whole line just to show you that the 7th rank leads to pawns that are munched, and ultimately white ends up just up a ton of material here in a rook ending, which should be enough to win. So that illustrates the fact that f5 was played, Stockfish broke, meaning broke what a human would want to do, like Nakamura keeping the chain together, but there weren't a ton of obvious other options. So e takes f5 is played, and now where's the beef? What's the point? Well, the first thing white does is double down where he's strong. He plays rook f to b1, and I keep saying he and she all the time with these engines. Forget it's an it, but we're not going to refer to it like that. My bad, and I'm not trying to offend anyone or anybody. All right, rook f b1 is played here by white. It doubles down on the pressure on the b file, and again, makes it hard for black to find good moves. Queen a5 was played, but bishop to e6 was the move we analyzed. Now knight to e2 is played, bishop to c5. The trade and then queen to b4 illustrates a key point, which is that black can no longer castle. The queen owns the knight, owns the day. Rook takes c2 doesn't really change it. We'll just put our knight in a dominant square and go on to have a crushing attack. So the main point is bishop e6, not a great move. I tried to give other examples, and again, this is the philosophical storyteller in me. I want to make sure when we see these computers and these engines blow our minds, everyone, are they really teaching us something that we can apply to our games? Are they really improving on strong grandmasters? So for those of you that have been critical, say, Danny, get to the beef. I'm giving you the beef. I'm giving you the storyline that's leading to why this mind-blowing middle game is so impactful, because it does improve on the way the grandmasters approached it previously, and there weren't any other real better options. So again here, I've looked at bishop e6, right? There was nothing to do that. White's just so much better on a space level. The knight comes around, and it's coming into strong squares, which is why you would want to trade off the bishop owning the dark squares, but then you can't get castled. The other move we looked at, bishop e7, is a natural move. Well, bishop e6 just wins on the spot. Very hard to find any useful moves here for black. Queen a5 looks like a very logical move that isn't bishop e6 or bishop e7, and this is where the wheels start to come off and we can all take a breath and get excited. So the problem for white is white did all the things I said. You stack the pawn to ruin the structure, but now queen a5 stops you from moving the knight, actually guards the pawn. Where's the beef? I'll slowly unwind my position here. you can't really bring more pieces into the attack because I actually have threats on c3, right? Well, that's where the mind-blowing begins. Wrong. Queen to g5 is played. Stoofvlees calls Stockfish's bluff and actually laughs in the face of danger here with the knight hanging. Now, taking the knight right away is not really an option. The main point is that rook takes c3 immediately just falls down to the fact that white can play rook takes d7, and after king takes d7, we have the move queen takes f5 check, followed by rook infiltration. But the point is, after the move queen to g5 is played, and black plays bishop to e6 to solidify, white laughs in the face of danger again with the move rook 1 to b6. White is bringing everybody over here to the attack, and note that black now can't develop the bishop on f8 because of more problems than one. Queen takes g7 is a threat. Bishop e7 can't be played here because it's checkmate, but the fact that we're also threatening to open up the 7th rank is going to be more reasons we're going to find out that black can't develop. So rook 1 to b6 looks good. It brings pressure other than the fact that rook takes c3 is played. What other moves were there besides rook takes c3? Let me show you h6 if you're trying to unwind, just to show examples of clearing the 7th rank. I mentioned it. I should just show it. You take on e6, followed by check and takes, and the attack is unstoppable. Developing the bishop elsewhere, like we said, e7 is a non-starter, but bishop a3 and just about anywhere else runs into queen takes g7. And again, rook takes e6, followed by check and mate on d7 is unstoppable. So nothing to do besides rook takes c3. We all agree? Now the move. This is it. White, in this position, plays the move h3. We've given up material, a piece, and how has the attack been improved by the move h3? Absolutely crazy, because we analyze this. I analyze this myself, and then Jeremy helps me on analyzing it, and a guy that works so hard on Chess.com's lessons. They're amazing. You should check them out. And we literally went through options and could not find moves for black. So we came up with the best description for it, which was the most amazing Zugzwang I've ever seen. The point is that we've established a lot of reasons why the bishop can't develop. Queen takes g7, and then the 7th rank clears. h6 weakens the light square, so rook takes e6 wins on the spot. Moving the queen to squares that don't keep an eye on either the rook or the backwards attack coming to the back rank. We're going to see why in critical variations coming up. The most logical thing to do, if you can't move any of these pieces, is to bring your rook back to safety, which is what Stockfish did, having won the piece. And here's the move that might actually be just as good as h3 in terms of why it puts black in Zugzwang. Rook to c8 also does open ideas of queen e1, and the second move, c3, says that's not going to work here anymore. The whole point with this is that white has actually prepared a luft for the king to hide, and with the move c3, black is actually in Zugzwang here. We're going to start to see why. So queen moves were played in the game. We're going to establish why queen leaving this square is bad. What if you take the pawn on c3 again? This is critical. Rook to b8 check, rook to c8 is met by queen to c1. The fact that white actually just lost both pieces on the c file is why the attack ends up being winning here if you play rook takes c3. Again, check. Okay, the king can't move, by the way, because it's checkmate. No real other options here. Rook back to c8, queen to c1, and the game is over. Rook takes b8, the king escapes, the queen comes in. We've got all kinds of checkmate fun coming. So, black moved the queen to a4. Again, we've established the king side isn't going anywhere. King to h2. The move removes the king from any potential checks, and again, puts black in a spot where he has no moves. So we move the queen to a3, just waiting in the position. Now the move rook to a7 is played. And this is another reason why it moves like queen a5 were no good, because rook a7 was coming anyway. It basically transposes to the game. The point is, black has no way to develop and get the king out of this position, and everything about white's position is clearly going to be improved. We can win the a-pawn and start pushing it. We can continue to have dominant threats along the 6th and 7th rank. The other pieces can't leave the back rank without more pawns falling. Everything is falling apart. a5 is played to avoid rook a7 takes a6. Now we go back to b7, and after the move f4, we get rook back to a7. White is just sitting tight until black runs out of moves. a4 is played. Now the move rook b to a6 officially threatens to take a6, along with keeping all the other ideas open that you still had on the b file, which was to play things like rook to b8. Rook to b8, by the way, constantly threatens ideas of rook takes c6 because the rook is hanging. If I didn't establish that earlier, the only reason you didn't do that is because you don't want to leave the 7th rank for black to get developed. But as you get the pressure here, white's attack is not getting any worse and black isn't going anywhere. Here, black played f3. The notation I made for myself is what else? Again, let's establish moves here. If the move bishop to e7 is played, white's winning on the spot with queen takes g7. And again, black really hasn't improved anything. Things like rook f8, queen takes h7, you didn't achieve the purpose of developing the bishop, which was to get the king castled. If the queen goes anywhere that isn't keeping an eye on this bishop, rook takes e6 wins immediately on the spot. Black is again running out of moves. The other move we analyzed, what if you play rook g8 to guard the pawn so that you can get developed? Now queen takes f4 threatens rook takes e6 and queen to f7. So bishop e7 and then queen to f1 coming around here. Again, this key thing with rook g8 or the other idea of bishop e7 is that neither move actually achieve your goal of developing the king side, which would be to get the king castled. You're actually losing the right to castle. What about moves like queen to c1, staying aggressive? Now we have rook a8, threatening rook takes e6, which again would have been a common theme with rook to b8 ideas if the queen had wandered too far. Bishop e7, rook takes e6. We'll just give one line we analyze. Rook takes c8 and rook c7 is Bob's your uncle here as the queen and bishop continue to launch the mating attack. I think one of the last moves I haven't analyzed besides f3, let's see, would be, well, what about queen to b2? Again, just like queen to c1 we saw here. In this case, you can play rook takes e6 right away with queen h5. And after g6, because the queen isn't on c1, you actually have queen g4 gaining a tempo, and then queen takes f4 because the queen is not guarding the f-pawn. Again, unstoppable attacks coming to black along the f-file. So we've established no queen c1, no queen to b2, no rook g8. Bishop e7 is the last one. Oh, no, we already talked about that. This falls, and you haven't gotten out. So basically nothing to do but f3. And here comes the final push through with the combo. Queen h5, threatening rook takes e6. The move g6 is played. Queen takes f3, renewing the threat of rook takes e6. Finally, we see bishop e7. Now you can do it because the g-pawn isn't hanging and you've blocked the 7th rank. But now rook takes a4, queen to b2, rook back to a6, renews all kinds of threats over here against the king, and Stockfish finally cracked when he played the move queen to b8, as there was no real way to do anything, right? Getting the king out, you just lose the piece back, right? Moving the bishop anywhere, there's infiltration with queen takes d5 anyway. So out of moves, the queen retreats, and the final climax to the combination is rook takes e7, king takes, queen to f6 check, king d7, and rook d6 check. The mating net is real. King to c7 is met by queen to e7 and mate on d7. So the only option is to sacrifice the queen right back on d6. And now we have e takes d6, and white is just crushing in a queen and dark square dominance attack versus the king. Of course, I'm going to show you the rest of the game, because we always do. But the main point of the h3 Zugzwang, the combo that had black completely frozen, has already been illustrated. The funny thing that I always get to the end of these videos on is I want to show you the end, but the truth is this is just a completely winning position with a dominant attack, ownership of the dark squares, and an outside passed a-pawn. And I almost don't always enjoy showing you the final moments, because the computers don't always have the best technique when those neural nets take over. Queen f1, rook c4, a4. Note that the pawn cannot be taken because of queen to b5 check. Bishop f5, a5. Rook to a8, and now g4. Using both sides of the board is exactly what they should do. It is an instructive thing. When the queen is playing against the rooks, the more you split the board in half and the queen flexes, the harder it is for the pieces to coordinate, right? So just always remember that tip. I've given it many times. Bishop backs up, queen to b1. Again, the queen is flexing by popping to diagonals, taking advantage of multiple weaknesses, not just one. This is how the queen will outplay pieces time and time again. King takes, queen b6 check, and after bishop c6, rook c6, bishop e5, more material falls, and the game is over. Note again, rook takes a5 would have been met by queen to c7 check, forking. So rook c8, queen b5. I'm going to get a little faster here because this is just a queen against a dominant rook and bishop, where it gets even worse here when the rook has to give itself up for the new lady on b8. Again, sometimes the ending of these are a little bit of unnecessary checks and confusing approaches that they take. I don't always get it, but sometimes I love it. Sometimes I don't. Queen takes. Finally, we get... See, this is what I'm talking about. It's like, why am I here? finish the J-O-B, right? So anyway, it always ends with something nutty, but in the end, they do prove that despite giving up the queen for free, they know how to checkmate, and they get the job done. But ultimately, this position back here in the middle game, as we get to it, not just the combo, or let's say the new approach that was proven super powerful with f5, but then the follow-up, right? Queen to g5, the presence of mind of how difficult black's position would be to unwind despite the material losses. c3 and h3 back-to-back. Just absolutely nasty. Freeing the king and putting black in Zugzwang. As I highlight one of the key points, c3 really only puts them in Zugzwang because you see that if they take it, that's actually a bad idea because it opens the C file. And that was one of my favorite parts about the position. The rest of it was a game of tickle until black finally ran out of moves and white's combinations got nasty enough to end the game. So it was absolutely nuts. If you're not following the Computer Chess Championship, you should probably do that. You can head over there just by going to chess.com/ccc. There's literally games going right now. It looks like we got Fire and Ethereal throwing down. And like I said, the news at the end of the day that I've heard is that the Stockfish NNUE project, again updated efficiently neural net, is going to be taking the majority of the resources, partly because the results have been so accidentally fantastic. Taking the approach that Stockfish had, plugging it in to the neural net, let the machine learn on its own approach, has seen significant ELO gains, the kind of gains they haven't seen in 5 years. That's enough for you to relocate your resources, right? And it may actually change the game forever in terms of what the future is. We know there's the pure Alpha Zeros and the pure Leelas, and then what about these hybrids, right? When do we eventually blow ourselves up with Skynet becoming active, and who's going to be our John Connor, right? Probably Stockfish will be leading the way for the machines. But that doesn't mean for you fans of the more traditional brute force hardware that they're giving up. I actually hear a little birdie has told me that a Stockfish 12 is actually coming out very soon. My belief is that they're pushing it out because they already made enough progress not to justify not doing it. They might as well at this point, but that after that, the rumors will be true, and that probably most of the SF open source community will just be focusing on the neural net approach from this moment forward. So anyway, leave a comment. Let me know if you hear that I'm wrong and the rumors are different. Let me know if you enjoyed the game. I certainly did. It was a lot of fun, not just because the French got destroyed. And hopefully you appreciate the breakdown and understand that when they make breakthroughs like that on the board with f5 and this idea of h3 and c3, it is going to impact the most elite chess that is played by the humans that are still playing our game. Thanks for watching again. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will see you around on Chess.com.